It's possible to rely exclusively on the primary option to view and present your options. But it's also possible, and sometimes desirable, to show or print an option that's not actually the primary. In this movie, we'll look at how you can assign display overrides to views so that you can show an option regardless of what the primary is set to. So I'm in a file here called Option View Settings and looking at the 3D view of my lobby. Now, let's assume that I've got all the options set up the way that I like. And let's take a quick look here in the options dialog. So for the balcony, I prefer the bowed balcony and the glass doors for the door options and the round columns and so on. And I'm ready to go to the client meeting and show this to the client. Now, I've chosen the primary option for everything that I like, but it's now up to me to convince the client. Now, I could use the make primary option to switch back and forth between the primary option in order to present the various options, but it might be a little bit cleaner to be able to just have a nice clean view that I can show the client that has a certain collection of options. So to do that, what we're going to rely on is the ability to create view overrides. So if you look at the view that I'm in here and I go to the visibility graphics, you're going to see that when you've got design options in a file, there's a design options tab on the far right. Now, if I click over there, it's going to list each design option on the left, and then over here on the right, which option it's displaying. The default behavior is for it to be automatic. Now, the way to think about automatic is it basically says, show the primary. So for the balcony, we're going to show the primary. The lobby door is the primary, and so on. Now, it's possible for you to actually open this list and choose something other than the primary. You can also actually choose the primary as well, okay? Now, why would you do that? Well, if you want to create a view that no matter what happens in the editing or in the changing of the primary, it always shows a particular option, then it's a good idea to come in here and actually set what you want first. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change all of these to show my primary option. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to rename this view and just call this Scheme A. So that's my preferred scheme. Now I'm going to duplicate that and rename that. And this will be Scheme B. It's also a good idea to make one more copy that you leave set to automatic. You can call this a working view. You can call it the automatic view. I'll go ahead and call it auto to remind myself that that's going to be automatic. Now I need to change the settings in both the auto view and the Scheme B view. So here I'm in the auto view. So I'll go back to Visibility Graphics, VG, Design Options, and I'm going to set all these back to automatic. So now this one's set to automatic, and regardless of what we do with the primary option, it will reflect the primary option. And then let's do Scheme B here. And maybe I'll show the glass panel railing here. Maybe I'll show the simpler doors, the simpler columns, and so on. You see everything changes here in this scheme. Regardless of what I do now with design options, this view will always show the options that you see here on my screen. So even if I choose to edit one of the other options, suppose I decide to edit the round columns, notice that the round columns do not display here. If I go to the auto view, notice that the columns do display here because this view is set to show automatic. So it responds the way that all the views have up until this point. So that's why it's a good idea to keep one of these automatically set views that you use for editing, and then consider these other two, Scheme A and Scheme B, to be your presentation views. So I'm going to go back to main model. So now I can take those views and I can go to the client meeting with that. Now, there's one other case where you might want to keep this idea in mind. I'm going to go to my level 1 floor plan here, and you can see my 4 chairs are displayed because currently that's my primary option, and this particular view doesn't have any overrides applied. Now, let's say that we go to the client meeting and the client decides they like the sofas better. So we come back and we decide to take the sofas and we're going to make that the primary option. That's going to generate one of those can't be ignored warnings in Revit. And the problem is that I've already started tagging this furniture, and if I change the object, then the tags are no longer valid. So I have no choice but to delete the offending objects and go ahead and make the primary, or the only other option is to cancel and not do that. So obviously if I do this, it deletes some of the tags and the sofas display. But then, of course, if I go to next week's client meeting and they say, you remember those chairs? I actually did like those better now that I think of it. Well, now I'm right back in the same boat again. And what you're going to see is that you're going to be constantly going back and forth and recreating these annotations. So you remember that the intent of design options was to be used in early schematic design. But if you push it later and later into DD and you start trying to annotate your designs, it's going to make it challenging to do so, particularly if people are constantly changing the primary. So this is where using that technique that I just showed you of doing a dedicated view override can really help. I've got 2 floor plans here, 2 copies of the floor plan that are already set up with the technique I just showed you below. And notice that this one, if we go to VG, is permanently set to show the chairs. And this one, if we go to VG, is permanently set to show the sofas. And of course, you can see in both views, the tags are still here, even though a few moments ago, I was changing the primary. So because both of these views were unaffected by the change in primary, their tags were preserved. So even though it's a little bit more work to set up the multiple views, I think it's often worth the effort because it will save you a lot of rework, particularly if you're trying to annotate those design options that you're creating.